When Ellie Carson inherited her late uncle's crumbling farmhouse, everyone said she'd gotten the short end of the stick, just a rotting roof and unpaid taxes. But buried beneath the dust and silence was a secret no one saw coming. A discovery so staggering, it would rewrite history and give one struggling mother the second chance of a lifetime. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this make you believe in second chances and hidden miracles, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might just change the way you see the world. The sky stretched wide and pale over the dry Kansas plain as Ellie Carson stepped out of her rusted SUV, her daughter Grace clutching her hand, and their golden retriever bounding ahead like it was an adventure. But Ellie didn't feel adventurous. She felt tired, the kind of tired that lived in your bones, the kind that came from months of sleeping in borrowed beds and watching your life collapse, piece by unpaid piece. The farmhouse stood crooked in the distance, like it had bowed under the weight of its own memories. Paint peeled from every corner. The porch leaned as if it had given up waiting for someone to come home. Ellie's boots sank slightly into the dirt as she took her first steps toward it. The land around them, once tilled, now wild hummed with bugs and dust. Grace looked up at her, wide-eyed, but silent. This was their last shot. She hadn't spoken to her Uncle Henry in over 10 years, not since the fallout over her mother's will. Yet, somehow, when he passed, the deed to this forgotten patch of earth had arrived in her mailbox with a scribbled note. "You'll know what to do when you get here." Ellie didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she read it. She'd lost her job 3 weeks earlier, her savings were gone, and the landlord had changed the locks. Inheritance or not, the timing felt more like desperation than fate. The screen door groaned as she pushed it open. Dust exploded into the air. The living room was frozen in time-yellowed curtains, water-stained wallpaper. An old armchair pointed toward a blank TV. A photo on the mantel showed Henry in his younger days, holding a rifle and grinning beside a younger Ellie she barely remembered being. "It smells like books and old people," Grace whispered, wrinkling her nose. Ellie chuckled, brushing a cobweb from her shoulder. "That's how you know it's got character." They moved slowly from room to room. The kitchen was a time capsule: ceramic rooster tiles, a cracked linoleum floor, and a fridge that hadn't buzzed in years. Upstairs, the bedrooms were empty, save for a single twin bed, and boxes filled with papers, receipts, and old radios. It wasn't much, but Ellie had spent the past 6 months hearing no. This house, this land, this broken little legacy was the first yes she'd gotten in a long time. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, and Grace fell asleep curled in a sleeping bag in the living room, Ellie sat on the front steps, staring at the fields. The silence out here was heavy, but not unkind. She ran her fingers over the key, still hanging around her neck. The one that had come with the house, but didn't seem to fit any door she'd tried. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to find out. Morning arrived without ceremony, the sun rising slowly over the cracked horizon. Ellie stirred on the old couch she'd claimed as a bed, a throw blanket over her legs, and Grace still fast asleep beside her. The dog Scout was already pawing at the back door, tail wagging, ready to explore. Ellie rubbed her eyes and rose, her body stiff from the hard springs beneath her. She poured a cup of coffee from the camping thermos she'd brought, no electricity yet, and stepped onto the back porch. The land behind the house stretched endlessly, broken only by an old windmill and a rusted tractor swallowed by weeds. Somewhere out there, her uncle had spent decades alone. The quiet here was the kind that got inside you. It made Ellie think too much. Maybe. About how she'd failed to keep her marriage together. About how she couldn't even afford a birthday cake for Grace last month. About how none of this land, this life was part of the plan. But plans, she was starting to learn, were for people who had options. Later that morning, they began to clean. Grace swept up broken glass and dead moths from the corners. Ellie pried open windows that hadn't seen light in years. In the hallway, she found an old oil painting of the farm, its colors dulled by time, but its details lovingly rendered. It must have meant something to him. She hung it back up. In the pantry, while clearing out rotted cans and broken jars, Ellie spotted a strange lump beneath the floorboards. The wood was uneven, like something was pressing up from below. She dropped to her knees, knocking gently, then harder, hollow. She pried up the board with a screwdriver. Beneath it lay a square trapdoor, solid wood, with a heavy iron latch and a handle that looked untouched in decades. It wasn't listed on the floor plan. Her breath caught. She reached for the key around her neck. Slid it into the latch. Click. It turned. A low creak followed as the door opened into darkness, a faint smell rising, earthy, metallic, old. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and shined it into the void. A dirt stairwell descended into the ground, edges reinforced with rotted wood beams. Scout growled low in his throat. Ellie's heart thudded. She felt it deep in her chest. Not fear, exactly. Something else. Like something waiting. "Mom?" Grace's voice behind her. Ellie turned, forcing a smile. "Just cleaning." She shut the trapdoor and placed the floorboard back over it. She'd come back later. Alone. Because whatever was down there, it wasn't part of the house. And she was starting to wonder if that meant it was the part that mattered most. That night, long after Grace had fallen asleep to the sound of wind brushing against the window panes, Ellie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the key. It lay between her hands like a question she wasn't ready to answer. The trapdoor's creak still echoed in her mind, and the smell that had drifted up from below lingered in her memory like smoke, old earth, metal, and something else she couldn't name. She checked on Grace one more time, kissed her forehead, then clipped the leash to Scout's collar and made her way back to the pantry. The flashlight in one hand, she peeled the board back again, slower this time. Scout whined, pulling slightly on the leash, ears low. The darkness below felt thicker tonight. She shined the beam downward. The stairs were steeper than she remembered, just packed dirt, held in place by the bones of old timber. The air coming up was cool, unnaturally so, like a cellar that had never known sunlight. She hesitated. What was she even looking for? Answers? Maybe. Or maybe she was just chasing the only thing in this place that felt deliberate. The rest of the farm was chaos and ruin. But this was hidden, sealed, left behind for a reason. She took the first step. Then another. Scout followed reluctantly, his paws scraping the loose dirt. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly in her hand as she reached the bottom. It wasn't a large space, maybe 10 feet wide, 7 feet across. Reinforced with old planks, tin sheeting, and rusted nails. A single hanging bulb dangled from the ceiling, its cord trailing somewhere out of sight. She pulled the light's chain. Nothing. The flashlight swept across the room. Against the far wall sat a large wooden crate. Beside it, a steel filing cabinet so old the paint had bubbled and peeled. On the ground, a pair of boots, military style. Dust, covered. Untouched. She ran, her fingers over the crate. It had markings, letters, and numbers faded and almost unreadable. Her eyes caught one word beneath the grime. Confidential. She stepped back. What the hell was this? Suddenly, Scout barked, sharp and loud, and Ellie nearly dropped the flashlight. He was sniffing the far wall, pawing at something near the baseboard. She followed him, knelt, and found a panel slightly loose. Prying it open revealed a narrow gap, and inside, a bundle of papers wrapped in plastic, and a small photograph curled with age. 2 men stood in the photo. One was her uncle. The other wore military insignia, and had a serious face, arms slung around Henry's shoulders like a brother in arms. On the back, in faded pen, 1,950. 2. Don't ever let this surface. Ellie felt her stomach turn. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just some old storm shelter. It was a secret. And she'd just become its keeper. The morning light felt different the next day, thinner. Like it was, struggling to break through something heavier than just clouds. Ellie made Grace breakfast, her hands moving automatically through the motions. Toast, eggs, the last of the instant coffee. She smiled when Grace asked if they could explore the barn later, but her mind was still in the shelter, still thinking about that photo. That crate. The words, "Don't let this surface." After Grace ran off to play with Scout in the field, Ellie returned to the trapdoor, heart thudding with every step. This time, she brought gloves and a crowbar. She didn't know what she expected to find inside the crate, but the fact that it hadn't been touched in decades, made it feel more like a time bomb than a time capsule. She descended slowly. The air was cooler today, the kind of stillness that suggested no living thing had breathed it in a very long time. With effort, she pried the crate open. Inside, canvas sacks, each marked with faded military stamps. She untied one, her fingers trembling. Gold glinted beneath the dusty canvas bricks, heavy and engraved, tarnished with time but unmistakable. She stumbled backward. Gold. Military gold. Dozens of bricks. She opened another sack. More of the same. Her breathing quickened as she dropped to her knees, trying to wrap her head around it. This wasn't inheritance. This was a fortune. She tried to count sacks upon sacks, then stopped when she realized the number didn't matter. It wasn't just money. It was too much money. It was history. And it had been buried, sealed, hidden away by her uncle with the kind of care that said he'd never intended for it to be found. Or maybe, he'd been waiting for someone who wouldn't waste it. Ellie sat on the dirt floor, gold in front of her, and let the weight of it settle on her shoulders. This changed everything. She could leave this place. She could give Grace a life with choices, with stability, with more than leftovers and hand-me-downs. But she also knew what gold like this meant. Someone had hidden it. Someone might still be looking for it. And if the photo was any clue, it went back decades, possibly longer. She looked again at the faded military stamp. Not US. German. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just hidden treasure, it was stolen. And suddenly, the farm didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt watched. Ellie didn't sleep that night. Not really. She'd stayed up after Grace went to bed, sitting at the kitchen table with the photograph and one of the gold bars wrapped in an old dish towel. The metal felt heavier than its weight, heavier than her conscience. She kept turning the photo over in her hands, reading the words again and again. 1,950. 2. Don't ever let this surface. She couldn't make sense of it. She'd spent the past year drowning in fear, in scarcity rent notices, unemployment lines, food stamps that barely fed a growing child. And now, she had a crate of gold in her root cellar that could change everything. But it wasn't clean. It wasn't legal. And that changed the rules. By morning, Ellie was back in the shelter, flashlight gripped tight, heart hammering. The filing cabinet in the corner had refused to budge the first time. But now, with her adrenaline surging and her arms aching with determination, she yanked and pried until it gave a groan and finally opened. Inside were manila folders, maps, and yellowing blueprints stamped with a foreign seal. Some pages had German text, others had diagrams that looked like infrastructure layouts. Bridges, railroads, vaults. One folder was labeled simply, Reichsbank transfer, final operation. Ellie stared at it, the reality dawning. This wasn't just buried gold. It was war loot. The kind people whispered about in documentaries and Cold War novels. Stolen Nazi gold, funneled through shadow networks after World War II. She felt sick to her stomach. Tucked inside the folder was a smaller envelope sealed but brittle with age. She peeled it open. Bullets. 5, precisely lined up, wrapped in wax paper, and beneath them, a handwritten letter addressed to Henry Carson. Her uncle. She unfolded it slowly. If you're reading this, then it means we've failed to deliver. You're the last man I trust with this. Keep it hidden. Keep it quiet. This treasure was never meant for any one man's pocket. It was meant to rebuild what war destroyed. Do not let them find it. They're still looking. E. S. Morrison, 1,954. Ellie pressed the paper to the table, her fingers trembling. E. S. Morrison. That name sparked something in the back of her mind. Her uncle had mentioned it once briefly, in a story about men who buried ghosts and gold in the same hole. She hadn't believed him then. But now? She looked again at the gold, the blueprints, the bullet casings. Everything told her to run, to call someone, to disappear. But then she thought of Grace. Of what it would mean to walk away from this. Of what it might mean to step into it. And just like that, the question shifted. It wasn't, what do I do with this? It was, what did my uncle expect me to do with this, and why me? The next day brought wind. Strong, warm gusts that blew grit through the cracks in the windows and rattled the loose panels of the old barn. Ellie kept Grace indoors, trying to distract her with books and old toys they'd found in the attic. But her mind stayed locked underground. She couldn't ignore the photograph anymore. Her uncle and that man, E.S. Morrison. Who was he? And why did he trust Henry with something this big? Ellie went through every dusty box in the upstairs hallway, every drawer in the desk, until finally, behind a pile of rusted tools in the hall closet, she found a worn leather journal, bound with a single strap of twine. H. Carson. Her uncle's handwriting. She opened it. The entries weren't dated, but they read like confessionals. Notes about the war, about secret meetings in Berlin, about being stationed in Bavaria during Reconstruction. One entry stood out. They say gold's just metal, but when you know where it came from, whose hands it passed through, it becomes something else. We didn't steal it. We saved it, kept it from falling into worse hands. Morrison said it best. Not all treasure belongs to the state. Some of it belongs to the broken. Ellie read the page twice. There was no mention of the exact amount. No mention of who they were hiding it from. Just a constant refrain. Keep it hidden, keep it safe. She flipped further and found a photo taped to a page. Same man, Morrison. This time in uniform. U.S. Army Intelligence. Ellie stared at the name stitched above his chest, then grabbed her phone and typed it in, heart racing. Nothing at first. Then, an old military record. Deceased. 1,955. Cause of death. Classified. Her breath caught. Scout barked suddenly. Loud. Urgent. She looked up, her heart leaping. Through the front window, a pickup truck was, easing up the long dirt road, dust trailing behind it. No one knew they were here. No one should have known. She grabbed Grace and told her to go to the back room, just in case. Scout growled, ears pinned back. The truck came to a stop. A man stepped out, tall, late 50s maybe, in a clean jacket and dark jeans. He didn't walk like a neighbor. He walked like a man used to being obeyed. He came to the door and knocked. 3 times. Calm. Not rushed. Ellie opened it just a crack. Can I help you? He tipped his hat politely. Name's Walker. Just passing through. Friend of Henry's. Ellie's pulse spiked. He smiled. I believe he left something behind. And I think you might have found it. Walker didn't push his way inside, but he didn't leave either. He stood calmly on the porch, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes scanning the land like he'd been here before. Ellie's hand gripped the edge of the door, still partially closed between them. Inside, Scout growled low behind her. Grace was in the back room with headphones on, just like she'd told her. Safe. For now. I was sorry to hear about Henry, Walker said smoothly, his voice low and almost rehearsed. He was a good man. Complicated. But good. Ellie swallowed. You said you were a friend. He nodded. Of sorts. We served, indirectly. Different channels. I was Army. Intelligence side. Henry and I crossed paths in Europe. Her heartbeat spiked. During the war? His eyes flicked to hers. After, mostly, cleanup, reconstruction, logistics. The silence hung between them like smoke. I'm not sure what you're looking for, Ellie said carefully. Walker offered a small smile. I think you are. And there it was, laid bare without threat, without accusation, but just enough to make her feel exposed. He didn't have to say it, he knew, or at least he thought he did. I just came to pay my respects, he added, tapping the brim of his hat. But if you happen to come across anything that doesn't belong here, anything, unregistered, I'd be more than happy to take it off your hands. Quietly. Ellie felt the cold reach her spine. You think I have something illegal? Walker shrugged. Let's not pretend we both don't understand what's buried under this house. Ellie's grip tightened. If there is something, why do you care now? Because gold doesn't stay hidden forever, he said simply. Eventually, it corrupts the soil it sleeps under. People start asking questions. They dig where they shouldn't. He reached into his coat and pulled out a card, holding it out between 2 fingers. If you find anything, call me. Before someone less courteous comes knocking. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. He didn't look back. Ellie shut the door and locked it. Her hands were shaking. She turned and leaned against it, Scout, pressing close to her leg like he sensed something in her that needed grounding. What the hell had her uncle been mixed up in? That night, after Grace was asleep again, Ellie returned to the shelter. The gold was untouched, but she noticed something new: muddy prints near the trapdoor. Not hers, not fresh, but recent enough. Had someone already known? She opened the folder again. Morrison's name, the phrase, Operation Harvest. Blueprints marked with train lines and locations across Europe. One in particular circled in red. Ellie took a picture with her phone. Then she pulled out a new piece of paper and started writing. Names, dates, maps. If someone wanted this badly enough to show up at her door, she needed to understand what they were willing to do to get it. But more than that, she needed to decide if keeping it was ever truly an option. Because what she had found wasn't just treasure. It was a truth someone had tried to bury for 70 years. And now it was hers. The next morning, the land felt different. The quiet that had once comforted Ellie now pressed in like a warning. She opened every curtain, walked every room twice, checked the locks on the doors even though she knew they hadn't been touched. Still, her gut told her things were moving faster than she could control. She took Grace into town under the guise of running errands. The moment they hit cell signal, her phone buzzed with missed calls from a blocked number. She deleted them. At the public library, she pulled up everything she could find on Operation Harvest. Most of it had been scrubbed, just footnotes and declassified records, mentions of missing gold, stolen assets, and a military operation too quiet for anyone to dig into deeply. But she did find one article from 1987, a retired colonel, who claimed a cache of Nazi treasure had been hidden in the Midwest by patriotic defectors. He died in a car accident 2 weeks after the interview. The quote that stuck with her: "It wasn't about greed. It was about control. If you could hold that kind of wealth, you didn't just survive the war, you shaped what came after." Ellie closed the browser and held her head in her hands. This wasn't just about gold. It was about leverage, legacy, and she was sitting on all of it. When they returned home, the mailbox had been opened and left ajar. No mail inside, no flag raised. Just a small black envelope resting in the bottom, unmarked. Inside, a single typed message: "What belongs to history cannot be inherited. You have 7 days." That night, Ellie stayed up drawing a full inventory of everything in the shelter. She took photos, scanned documents, backed everything up on a drive she hid beneath the kitchen floor. If anything happened to her, someone had to know the truth. She considered calling the FBI, or the press, or just disappearing. But then she looked at Grace sleeping beside her, and the decision crystallized. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about making sure her daughter didn't grow up in a world where secrets could be buried and forgotten. She returned to the shelter, crouched beside the crate, and lifted out one bar, cold, heavy, engraved. $130 million, maybe more, lay beneath her feet. But none of it would matter if she didn't survive long enough to decide what to do with it. The sky turned slate gray by midday, the kind of overcast that pressed low against the land like a warning. Ellie watched it from the kitchen window, one hand wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, the other clutching the black envelope she'd pulled from the mailbox. Her eyes hadn't left the message for hours. "You have 7 days." Scout sat at her feet, restless, his ears twitching at every creak and shift of the house. Grace was at the table, sketching the old windmill out back in colored pencil, unaware of how fast their world was unraveling. The knock came just after noon, not loud, but deliberate. Ellie stood slowly. She didn't need to look through the peephole. She already knew. Walker. But this time, he wasn't alone. A second man stood beside him, younger, clean-shaven, and wearing a jacket with a small government emblem on the breast. Ellie cracked the door, just enough to show her face and nothing more. "We told you we'd be back," Walker said. His tone was still calm, but harder now. "We gave you time." The younger man offered a thin smile. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Callan, Federal Historical Recovery Division. We've received reports that there may be property of significant interest stored on these grounds." Ellie didn't flinch. "You mean stolen war gold?" Callan blinked. So did Walker. I don't know what you're talking about, she added. And unless you have a warrant, you're trespassing. Walker took a step closer. Ellie, you don't understand what you're in the middle of. I do, she snapped. I'm in the middle of protecting my daughter. That's what I'm doing. The rest of you, whatever government, shadow operation, or forgotten war you came from, you're not getting a single thing, unless it goes through the right channels. Ma'am, Callan began, but she shut the door. Hard. She locked it, bolted it, and backed away. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from clarity. They weren't just going to ask nicely. This wasn't about diplomacy. It was about control. That night, she moved everything. Brick by brick, she removed the gold from the shelter and stored it in the old barn's hidden crawlspace. She wrapped each bar in plastic, taped documents to the underside of rafters, and stashed the original blueprints in a false panel in the kitchen. By dawn, she was exhausted. But she wasn't done. She drove to the next town over, to a lawyer her friend back in Topeka had recommended, someone who owed her a favor. She brought everything. The photo, the journal, the scanned letters, even the warning note. She left copies, sealed with instructions. If anything happens to me or my daughter, she told the lawyer, this story goes public. Every last detail. He looked at her like she was insane. She probably was, but she also wasn't backing down. When she returned to the farm, she found the gate open, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, Scout was barking frantically. She ran. The door was ajar. Grace was gone. Ellie's scream ripped through the silence. Grace! She tore through the house, Scout bounding beside her, barking like mad. Every room was empty. The back door wide open, the field stretching out like an ocean of panic. Then she heard it, a shout. High, far, but familiar. She sprinted toward the barn, heart thudding in her ears. There, by the old tractor, stood Grace, pale, shaken. But okay. A woman stood beside her. Not Walker, not Callan. Someone new. Mid-40s. Leather jacket. Hair pulled tight. A glint of a badge at her belt. Ellie skidded to a stop. Who are you? The woman held up both hands. Agent Rowan. Counter. Intelligence Division. I came to help. Grace ran to Ellie, clutching her waist. They were in the house, Mom. But she pulled me out. Ellie pulled her close, eyes locked on Rowan. Why should I believe you? Because I've been tracking Walker for 12 years. He's not federal, he's private. Black market salvage. He's been hunting war treasure all over Europe and now he's here. Ellie didn't speak. Her brain was reeling. Rowan stepped forward, softer now. Henry wasn't just protecting gold, he was protecting people. He gave shelter to men hunted after the war for what they knew. That photo? Morrison wasn't just a soldier. He was a whistleblower. Ellie tightened her grip on Grace. I can protect you, Rowan said. But we need to move, now. They packed within an hour. Just the essentials, what couldn't be left behind. Ellie took the flash drive, the files, one bar of gold, and the letter from Morrison. She left the rest. Buried. Rowan gave her a new name, a new location. Witness protection, but unofficial. Off the grid. Before leaving, Ellie wrote a letter of her own, sealed it, placed it in a waterproof box beneath the old windmill. To whoever finds this, know that what you've uncovered isn't just treasure, it's testimony. Proof that truth, no matter how long it's buried, always wants to surface. Use it well, protect the innocent, and for God's sake, don't let it fall into the wrong hands. E.C. Then they drove. Miles and miles. A new life ahead. A safer one. For now. Epilogue. 2 years later, in a quiet coastal town, Ellie opened a small bookstore. Grace started school. Scout grew old, content on the front porch. No one knew what they had left behind. But sometimes, when Ellie closed the shop late at night, she would run her fingers over the old metal now hanging behind the counter, Morrison's dog tag, rescued, from the shelter before they left. It reminded her of what they survived, of what they protected, and what they chose to leave buried. Because some stories aren't just about what's found. They're about what we guard, what we carry, what we leave behind for those brave enough to dig again.